In my late teen years, the phenomena that I had used to sort of get into quasi-adulthood, wearing a facade, having a false self, began to break down. And I had the first of what were several major bouts of depression.
Welcome to the Soulful Impact Podcast, illuminating a path to building a better world while living a life of fulfillment and freedom. I'm your host, Brooks Barron. Today, my guest on the show is Jerry Colonna.
The consequence of living in that disembodied way manifested in an outward success that ticked all the boxes of extrinsic affirmation. I got adoration from the world at large. I got accolades from the world at large. The more frequent those accolades, the deeper my depression became.
Jerry is a former VC tech investor turned world-renowned, highly sought-after executive coach. Jerry is known as the CEO Whisperer, and he's a founder of the New York and Boulder-based coaching firm Reboot. He's also the author of two phenomenal books, Reboot and Reunion. I was so excited to bring Jerry on the show because I know that he's not only a world-class leader and coach, but he's also someone who has walked the path of the nature-based journey of soul initiation.
For me, the quest itself was kind of a fulfillment, if you will, of something that had been going on for a while. I think what I remembered was who I really was.
Just before we hit record, I reflected to Jerry that I experience him as a genuinely soul-rooted adult. And I think that's something that's unfortunately quite rare in our times. But I believe that the tremendously valuable contribution that Jerry is making to the building of a better world, including his groundbreaking books and his work with leaders and teams, is directly connected to the journey that he went on to find and embody his soul's truest purpose. In this conversation, Jerry and I dig into that journey.
We have this ahistorical, non-remembering aspect about ourselves. And so among the things that we fail to remember is that we have been here before.
He shares about how the earth literally swallowed him whole and drew him down into herself, giving him a wake-up call that sent him on this journey of self-discovery. Jerry explains how the version of himself that he discovered on that journey and the essence of his soul's unique gift that emerged has informed and empowered his life and work ever since. Finally, Jerry and I unpack how the lessons learned from what helps us make it through our own personal dark times in a good way can also inform how we might collectively make it through, in a good way, these current dark times that we're witnessing on the global stage.
We will always come back to this because the shadow never goes away. They are not the enemy. They are us. Because we had the temerity to forget, to think that the work is done.
Before we begin the episode, a brief reminder that if this conversation resonates with you, I'd love to invite you to explore more of our work at Soulful Impact. We are committed to supporting you in finding and living your soulful impact in any way we can, including this freely available podcast, and also through one-on-one coaching, coaches training, our regular sound alchemy ceremonies in the majestic Colorado Rockies, and our annual Deep Dive Vision Quest program in the soul-stirring desert of Southern Arizona. Learn more and get in touch at soulfulimpact.co. That's soulfulimpact.co. Hello, Jerry.
Hello, Brooks. How are you?
Doing very well, thanks. So good to see you.
You too.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks again for being here. As I was just sharing a little bit with you before we hit record, you have been a really meaningful example for me in my journey. You've also been very generous in giving me some time and some guidance. My memory goes back to that hike we shared in Boulder.
Mm-hmm. Wonderland Lake.
That's right. Yeah.
And up and above. So.
That's right. Yeah, and I was wearing a Knowles hat.
You were indeed. I remember that.
And deliberating about something, feeling stuck about something.
I think it was
You,
about your life.
about my life, yeah. I think that's right. And at one point you just told me, you're like, you come to me wearing a Knowles hat, talking about your experiences out on the land. The answers are out on the land,
That's
dude.
right. That sounds about me.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was really exactly what I needed to hear. Just that reminder in that moment. It was like that you didn't have the answers for me. That the answers are out there for me to 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 discover in myself and on the land. And I know you're someone who I think in a similar way to me has been very impacted in your life by deep experiences on the land. So I guess maybe I'd love to start there, specifically asking you to share about your experience going on a vision quest with Animist Valley Institute in 2008, but also in a broader sense, what relationship with nature and land has meant to you in your journey.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. I'd actually think it would be best to start with where I was before, which was disembodied, to use a phrase that you used before, or the opposite of it, unrooted. And to think back to Freud's great work, Civilization and its Discontents, I was discontented.
Hmm.
Um,
And what had gotten you there?
oh, I was a mess. A bunch of things, and I'm thinking specifically of life in my 30s, in which I had been pursuing external validation, really not understanding what was going on. I mean, I have to put it into a larger context. So, in my late teen years, the phenomena that I had used to sort of get into quasi adulthood, wearing a facade, having a false self, began to break down. And I had the first of what were several major bouts of depression,
Mm.
which led to a suicide attempt, which led to a hospitalization, which led to really going into therapy in a meaningful way when
Mm.
I was 18, 19 years old.
Wow.
And during that time period, I would argue that not only was I disconnected from what we would say is the land, which is a very Bill Plotkin way of seeing things, the land
Mm.
as this archetype, land with a capital L, for
Yeah.
those who are listening and don't know, right? And the land itself is a catchphrase to talk about, let's call it the soul of the earth.
Mm.
It's more than just the physical soil that you walk on. It's a deeper connection. So not only was I experiencing a lack of connection there, I was, not coincidentally, but wholly relatedly, I was disembodied from myself. And in my 30s, the consequence of living in that disembodied way manifested in an outward success that ticked all the boxes of extrinsic affirmation. I got adoration from the world at large. I got accolades from the world at large. And the deeper those, or the more frequent those accolades, the deeper my depression became.
Mm.
And notice I'm fluidly talking about both a disconnection from what you would call the land and from what I might call my own soul.
Your own soul.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
by the time my late 30s rolled around, this discontentedness, this dis-ease, this dissatisfaction was so profound that I almost attempted suicide again. So the first attempt at 18 years old was a cutting of my wrists that put me into the hospital for 3 months, not to heal the wrist, but to heal my soul, or at least patch it up and send it on its way. Fortunately, I didn't act out the feelings. Fortunately, I had the wisdom to reach out to my therapist at the time, Dr. Sayers, and I called her up and I went to see her. And fortunately, she set me on a path that led me to reading, among other things, Parker Palmer's Let Your Life Speak, Pema Chodron's When Things Fall Apart, and her least known, but to me most profound book, Sharon Salzberg's Faith, which is about a loss of faith and a regaining of faith. And those three experiences, those three books, and that experience set me on a path not only towards understanding or finding my way to Buddhist principles, but also beginning to more fully realize that what I was experiencing was a disconnect and disembodiment, and of which a disconnect from the land was a manifestation. So that's the scenario. Our hero is a freaking mess. Overweight, disembodied, disconnected from self, outwardly successful, inwardly miserable. And so then I go on these experiences. And I know you specifically were interested in my experience with the Amidst Valley Institute's Vision Quest. But there were many trips that I took before that got me closer and closer to it. I remember, for example, in 2001, I did a trip for the very first time. I've done 3 trips altogether to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And to spend a week rafting at the bottom of the Grand Canyon was a profound experience in and of itself, but it actually was part and parcel of what got me on a vision quest. I began almost like a tourist visiting the earth. I began seeing places that I never would have taken myself to. Places like, for example, northern British Columbia or Chile, and rafting in Patagonia, or crossing a polar ice cap in Greenland. And really what I was doing with hindsight was circling and circling and circling. I think of that Yeats poem where the falcon is circling and circling and the center cannot hold. I think the poem is called Slouching Towards Bethlehem. And I found myself circling and circling and circling towards something.
Like you were pulled towards something?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely pulled towards something.
How did you know that? How did you feel it in your body?
Well, I think it was easier to know it in hindsight than it was when I was experiencing it. Something was happening, something was shifting inside of me. And prior to the experience with Animus, I did I did this trip to Greenland, and about midway through the trip, where we were skiing, there was a blinding snowstorm, and I slipped into a crevasse and fell about 40 feet down.
Oh, wow.
With about 200 pounds of gear in a sledge that I had been pulling. I was traveling with 3 other fellas, 2 of whom knew what they were doing, 2 of us didn't. And it took them several hours to find me and pull me out.
Were you on a rope?
We were not roped to each other. So
you hit the bottom of the crevasse?
I did.
Holy cow.
and kind of busted up my hip. It was bad, and it was dangerous. And I ended up not really being able to continue the journey. And there was an indigenous group of folks who came to rescue, and they had an 8-hour snowmobile trip back to where I could be airlifted out. But the reason that this comes to mind is your language about being pulled towards something.
Yeah.
A few months later, I was not on the Vision Quest, but on a Soul Quest, which is another trip that Adamus organizes. It's kind of like a Vision Quest light. And one of the guides on that trip said to me, "Why do you think the earth pulled you in?" And it's because I was not paying attention to my life. I wasn't just paying attention to the fact that the ice field I was crossing was fragile. I wasn't paying attention to not being tied up in a safe way to my mates. I wasn't paying attention to my life.
What a wake-up call.
Yeah, it was a kind of like the earth reaching up and grabbing me in and saying, "Okay, motherfucker, what are you doing? How shall you live your life?" And so I can't talk about that quest without that context.
Is notable to me as well, the imagery of literally being swallowed up and pulled down. And as you know, that's this sort of big way that Bill and Animus approach soul work that is resonant with how I approached as well, of this kind of downward direction of spiritual exploration and the descent to soul.
It's the underground. It's
the underworld.
It's the underworld. It's the place from which it all springs, right? Whether you're talking about Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell, you're talking about the wisdom of elders who know that you have to lean into the shadow. You have to lean into the underworld in order to find who you are.
This feels like maybe a little bit of a divergence here, but maybe also a good time to ask the question. Here we are, we're talking about soul, and I'm wondering a little bit how you would describe what soul is, or what soul means to you.
When I was in college, I did an independent study, and I wrote a paper connecting Freud to the poet William Blake. And my advisor, this is for an English literature class, my advisor said, "What are you talking about? Freud was just sort of the antithesis of Blake." And the jumping off point was actually a book by the psychologist Bruno Bettelheim, in which he suggested that the English translations of Freud's earliest work made a mistake, that they substituted the Greek word psyche for the German word Seele, which properly translated means soul. Kind of changes the whole picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of the pathologization that traditional psychology and psychotherapy has done. Let me seek what is wrong.
Right.
What got disconnected is actually the soul work that's implicit inside of that. So there's a long way of saying, when I think of the notion of soul, I don't think of the notion of spirit. I don't think of that notion that is closer to the divine. I do think of that which is closer to the underworld, the root, the sensibility of, we live in dark times right now, Brooks. it's a really difficult time. And like a lot of folks, I've been trying to find my way. And what I have come to understand, I think, is that the only way through this time is to actually connect back to that which is most meaningful to you. And that is another expression of seed, of soul.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also of this thread of what you were speaking to earlier around disembodiment versus embodiment, disrootedness versus rootedness, and this way that, yes, that's really resonating for me. This idea of soul being, this root, this place from which we came, and that which feels most meaningful to us. And also perhaps that which we are guided to when we allow ourselves to be fully embodied beings in our own body, and maybe also in connection to the body of the earth.
You know, in my second book, Reunion, one of the things that I spend a lot of time with is the notion of memory. And there's a particular essay whose title means a lot to me, and it's by the theologian Friedrich Buechner. And the essay is titled A Room Called Remember. And the reason that pops into my head is that, as you know from the book, one of the things that I play with is that notion of re-member
Mm-hmm.
to overcome dismemberment.
Right.
And that memory in soul work, as you're talking about, I think that there is a part of the process that is re-membering that which has been dismembered. I remember coming back from Greenland, and I remember doing some healing Reiki work, and I remember having the sensibility that I was reoccupying a body that I had once occupied, but no longer were. That may be the source of the rootedness that you can experience when we talk.
So then you made your way out onto a quest from there?
For me, the quest itself was kind of a fulfillment, if you will, of something that had been going on for a while, and a kind of giving over. It was, it was 14 days, 4 of which were water only fast. You know the routine, and there was a descent. There was a deepening in the process, and I think what I remembered, to use a phrasing that I used before, was who I really was. You probably know my story, but during the water only fast piece, the 4 days when I was alone, the two things that stand out to me from that time, the first was digging a hole in a sandbank that was by a little creek and vomiting. And I want to be clear, I have never taken any plant medicine. I don't have judgment. I just haven't.
Mm.
And I remember vomiting for hours. I remember crying. And I remember that what went into that hole was all of the suffering, all of the pain, all of the tears of the emotional, mental, physical abuse I suffered as a kid. And I remember feeling I had finally found something large enough to contain it all, which was the earth itself.
Yeah.
And when I was done and purged, that's when I remember looking up in this altered state that I was in and seeing a face in the boulders that I called Grandfather Boulder. And I remember shaking my fist and asking why I had had to suffer what I had suffered. And I remember being told that the point of it all was so that I could listen. And that's when I came out of that experience. And as you know, there's ritualized ways of, quote, coming out of the experience, portals that one steps through and over and that kind of thing. And I remember Jay Cheer, who was one of the guides, asking me at one point, had I been hearing anything as I was both prior to the solo time and afterwards. And I had heard every time I passed this old ponderosa tree, a kind of whispery, holder. And what I came to understand was that that which had been dismembered was that who I am is holder of stories of the heart. See, by purging.
That had been dismembered or remembered?
Well, the fact of it had been dismembered. And the act of being there, the act of purging and making space for, allowed me to remember. This guy, that's who I am.
Absolutely who you are.
I hold.
And you listen on a very deep level.
And I listen.
Thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome. I wrote a poem during that time. I've never done this in a podcast. I'm going to read that poem to you.
Great.
And I wrote this while on that quest. Listen. On a brightening morning, when dark places seem furthest, Brother Warrior comes, helping me remember me. He stands with legs firmly rooted in the earth, arms at his side, palms open, back strong, heart exposed. You were not given this life to carry only your sorrow. You were not given this life only to lament. Make holy that which you were given. Go and listen. Over his shoulder, Grandfather Boulder, with his never-ending smile, looks on his two sons of the earth. Listening, he reminds, opens that which pain has closed. In listening, we are healing. We are never healed, but forever healing. We are never loved, but forever loving. That's what came to me.
Wow. I'm so moved by the wisdom of those words, and also by just how pure of an expression that feels to me of the path you have been walking since.
Indeed. I coach because I am holder.
Yeah.
This is who I am. This is how I am. And so, at one point you made reference to how did that quest, how did that experience manifest in who I am today? And when I am at my best, when I am rooted, when I've taken my seat, it's because I remember what Grandfather Boulder told me.
What helps you remember? What helped you remember, like in the wake of that experience? I imagine, I think of my own experience coming back from my first quest, and that for me was a very challenging time of being kind of really torn apart by the tension between the life I went back to and the experience I just had. I don't know if it was that way for you or not, but I'd love to hear you share a little bit of, yeah, like what did integration mean for you from that?
Oh, it was a long process.
Hmm.
Um, you know, like a lot of folks, I came back and ultimately upended my whole life.
Mm.
Um, because again, it needed, I was a mess. But, as I wrote in the poem, uh, we're never really fully healed. We're always in a process of healing. We're never really loved in a past tense way, but we're always in an active engagement of loving and being loved in that way. And so when I can't point to a time when the integration was complete. I'm still integrating right now, and that was 2008. Um, Now you started to ask a question, when do I remember? Well, I'll answer by saying I often forget. And so the practice of remembering is something that has to be done daily. Because look, we're socialized as, when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, and he pointed out in the second noble truth that which we do to push away suffering increases suffering. He had to say that because that's something that we forget
All the time.
all the
Yeah.
time, right? We're
Right.
socialized to move away from pain. We're socialized to move away and up and away from the underworld. And so, how often in a given week are we dragged back down to the crevasse, right? Sometimes it's big gestures like a busted hip, and sometimes it's small gestures, but it's always a process.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
by the way, I think that that's a really important assertion to understand, and speak to, because um, if one goes about this work and has that initial almost evangelized experience of, oh my God, this is the way,
Yeah.
you run the risk of thinking that this is the way.
Right.
And if I just find the way, I will never feel suffering again,
Yeah.
discontent, disease. And and that's a fallacy.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's super dangerous because
Yeah.
not only do you turn into a proselytizing asshole where you're telling people again and again how to live their lives, but you run the risk of really feeling terrible about yourself simply because you forget.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And kind of missing the point, missing that broken, open-hearted space of being in the always process, of the always healing, the always loving.
Yeah, as Sharon Salzberg likes to teach, begin again, right?
Yeah.
So you
Love that.
forgot.
Hmm.
So remember
Hmm.
again and again and again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah. I'm glad you spoke to that. It's definitely something I have watched myself get. Yeah, I'm prone to that on some level. I've been prone to that with Bill's work, with other teachers, or modalities or frameworks that I've found. I think it's such a understandable experience. So you find something that cracks something open for you, that's like,
Mm.
you know. easy to confuse the maps for the territory.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things I most enjoy about this podcast, and why I like to ask the questions like, what does soul mean to you? Because at the end of the day, there's no one path.
Mm-hmm.
I think there can be real value. I think there is real value in this is something this is great because my lovely wife, Ashley, and I have divergent styles on this, where I'm a lover of structure and she's not. We were talking about this the other night, the same topic, but I find a lot of value in a specific articulation of a path that allows one to understand, like a good map does, kind of where you are and what might be ahead and what sort of is possible to encounter. And yet there's the there's the temptation to think you have something figured out, or to think you know more than others. That subtle superiority, certainly something I practice within myself. Like I know I see the part of me who goes there, who wants to be seen for knowing something, and also wants to keep himself safe by feeling better than.
What a human being you are.
Yeah, I suppose so.
No, I just wanted to normalize it. And I think that you did a wonderful job of self-awareness and recognizing that the wish for that structure, the wish for that way, the wish to be able to convey that way to someone else, is a mechanism towards safety for yourself. And it's rooted in a kind of loving wish to give to the other person.
Yeah.
Hey, this was valuable for me. Let me give that to someone else.
Yeah. And let us be connected in it. That's a big part of it for me too.
Yeah. I get that. I find that as I've gotten older and become more and more of an elder, I'm more and more comfortable with what I would call as a kind of non-directive way of being. And when I think back to my coaching practice, for example, it's really rooted in the experience that I had as a psychoanalytic patient of Dr. Sayers, whose own psychoanalytic tradition was very non-directive and allowed they would say the unconscious, you might say the soul, to speak. You know, and the more comfortable I am with not knowing an answer, the better a coach I've been.
Yeah.
The more comfortable I am with allowing genuine, open, honest questions to emerge, the better the experience just the better experience I have. You know, I do a lot of podcasts, and many folks want to send questions and a framework before. And I'm very comfortable receiving them, but I often don't read them. Because I don't know what's going to emerge.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So this reminds me of, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I've been listening to your book, your most recent book, Reunion, which has been quite a profound experience for me. And part of that, I think, is because of the way you create through the experience of that book a felt sense and multifaceted understanding of what it means to belong. And Um, and to whom do we belong?
Mm.
Um, and for me, when I hear it, I also hear the ring in the background also of this kind of bigger to what or to whom we belong, and to when I think of the earth
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and the divine. But you do a real deep dive around ancestry
Right.
in that book, and you share some examples, some moments of coaching sessions or
Mm.
other moments where you say, my ancestors spoke through me, which I think is only something that would be possible to happen. The only like that's possible. It's possible for that to happen, for you to do that because of your devotion to the emergent field
Mm.
and your ability to listen and channel in some way something that comes from, whether it comes from ancestors, soul, unconscious.
Right.
um I have just found that such a powerful notion of our ancestors speaking through us,
Mm.
and some of those examples that you give
Mm.
have really um, hit me in the heart, and awoken in me this deeper recognition of the loneliness we feel as people in a modern society who um, have actually been systemically separating ourselves from our ancestry and our lineage in many ways for a long time.
Because one of my favorite moments in watching Carl Sagan over the years when I was a boy is when he would talk about the evolutionary relationship between humans as a species and the earth.
Mm.
And he has this brilliant line. I can hear him still say it. We are made of star stuff. And he was
I
talking
love
about,
that.
just the physical reality, the physics, the astronomy
Yes.
of that which we call the planet being bombarded by star stuff.
Yeah.
And that star stuff is inside of us. We are
Yeah.
made of star stuff. And if you follow that, um, you know, thank you for making the connection to reunion. There are two quotes, two themes that I worked with, which was, and to lay it out a little bit more context, what I was trying to do was to understand what it is that is our work to do, our work that we cannot ignore, in a world that would allow such hatred and division. That, as I often say, babies will shoot babies. Babies
Hmm.
take AK-47s, AR-15s, and shoot babies. And somehow this is okay. What is it? How disconnected do we have to be to allow Siberia to burn?
Yeah. How
Right?
numb do we have to be?
How
How
numb do we
disembodied?
have? How disembodied,
Yeah.
right? Our great elders and ancestors, Joanna Macy, speaks
Mm.
about the work that reconnects, us to the land, reconnects us to ourselves and to each other. And so, what I was trying to do with the reunion as a theme was to understand that a reunification, ourselves with the land, ourselves with each other, ourselves with our ancestors, ourselves with ourselves, is the only way to stop babies from shooting babies.
Yeah.
And the ancestors are all around us. We just happen to call them elders. And I would argue that ancestors, elders, they're all angels, aren't they? They're all emanations of a divine. And as Elder Bell Hooks wrote in her poem, when angels speak of love, they tell us all things are union and reunion. And as I like to say, that is not a description, that is a prescription. Because what she's telling us is listen to the angels.
Makes me think of Grandfather Boulder.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. They're all around us.
And they're crying.
Yeah. Yeah, ready to be heard.
Yeah.
If we can just remember how to listen.
Think of that Joy Harjo poem I quote from in the beginning of Reunion. Remember the sun on the day in which you were born. Remember your mother and her journey. Remember your father. We are earth, red earth, yellow earth, black earth, white earth. We are earth.
Amen.
She's an elder, an indigenous woman who is pleading with us to remember.
Yeah. That who we are is earth and each other.
That's it.
Yeah, you alluded earlier to the dark times that we're in. I've done a lot of my own wondering and thinking about these times, and also kind of walked my own journey of wanting to do something, really wanting to do, still do. And the way of holding that has shifted and I think evolved, because it when we see that kind of just horror, like babies shooting babies, or Siberia on fire, or plastic islands in the ocean,
which become part of our bloodstream.
Exactly. It's like, well, so it's really easy to just get very disillusioned and to disconnect further, because it's so much to take in. And it's also easy to get reactive in a way that as understandable and well-intentioned as it is, actually ends up fueling more of the same toxicity in the culture. At least that's my belief. And how I've seen what I've watched also in myself, like a younger version of me had a kind of fiery activism that also had a lot of righteousness in it, and a lot of divisiveness, therefore, and superiority. And as much as I thought I was or wanted to be, speaking for the earth and the reunion, I was actually perpetuating the dismemberment in a subtle kind of way. My aspiration with Soulful Impact is, and the kind of the purpose of this podcast really is like an exploration of what does it look like to really make impact in a way that helps us leads towards this great reconnection and remembering that we need. That's rooted in a soulful place that comes from that part of us that knows that I am earth and I am you. That's a part that, in my experience, my view is not going to succumb to the division. And yet there's this conundrum that we can get into of well, but what do we do and what is enough? And as things get darker, where do we focus, and how much do we stand up and try to stop what's happening? How much do we try to build something new? How much do we just accept how much there's like how much momentum is in the system. It's like this big machine that needs to burn itself out, maybe.
Well, the short response is I'm not 100% sure, but I have some ideas. And the first thing I will say is it's been an odd, disconcerting experience to have written a book in a moment in time. I started working on Reunion in 2020. And shortly after the murder of George Floyd, in the middle of the pandemic. And the first line of the book is, this book began with a knee on the neck. And I don't know that you finished it, but the last few imagery is me kneeling at the gravesite of my father's biological mother in Ireland. I wrote the book at a time when I did not think we could be any more divided than we were. And so here we are, even more divided than we were.
Yeah.
But I wrote the book because I believe, and I still believe wholeheartedly in this notion. To be the ancestor my descendants deserve, I have to, with integrity, say that I did the best that I could do. And the divine, the good Lord, I don't know where it comes from, gave me an ability to put words together in such a way that people feel moved and compelled to listen. So I know that that's my tool, which gives me insight into what's my work to do. My infamous question has been, how have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want? And that question has reverberated around the world, right? And too often it leads to people to feel guilty and responsible. And that's not the point of the question. The point of the question is to evoke curiosity so that there's action, which leads to transformation.
Yeah. Empowerment. There's empowerment in that. Yeah.
The second, the restatement of that question, the reunion restatement, is, how have I been complicit in and benefited from the world as it is that I say I don't want to see? And more importantly, what am I willing to give up that I love in order to see the world that I want to see come into existence? Those questions are questions that you have to live with every day. It's not work that is ever going to be done. And to that end, I reached for a copy because I wanted to read the epigram that begins chapter 7. And in this quote, Rabbi Tarfon, who was a contributor to the Talmud, wrote, "It is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect the work." There is so much damn wisdom in that simple statement.
Yeah.
One piece to remember is that this work is never done.
Right.
One of the great mistakes of the last 60 years, and Parker Palmer and I have had a conversation about this recently, and I posted something on LinkedIn about this. One of the great mistakes about social progress is that we think we're done. We passed civil rights legislation and we thought we were done. Well, the civil rights legislation had an expiration date.
Right.
Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
We passed an assault weapons ban that had an expiration date. We passed the Violence Against Women Act that had an expiration date. These are true statements.
Wacky.
We left to the courts alone a woman's right to choose and never finished the job and passed legislation.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have this ahistorical, non-memory, non-remembering aspect about ourselves. And so among the things that we fail to remember is that we have been here before.
And we'll be here again.
And we will always come back to this because the shadow never goes away. These dark times are the shadow walking the land.
Yeah.
And so what is the work to do? The work is actually individual and collective. They are not the enemy. They are us.
Exactly.
Because we had the temerity to forget, to think that the work is done.
Right.
The work is never done. So that's the hard part. You want a piece of good news?
Please.
This is going to sound quasi, I don't know, boastful or whatever. Pema Chodron came to visit my wife and I a few weeks ago.
Cool.
Yeah, pretty cool, right?
That's awesome.
That is awesome. And I tried like heck to get her to tell me how to think about the world right now. And every time I tried to sort of nail her to the floor on that, she would look up from the couch in our living room and she'd say something like, "Boy, those mountains look beautiful." And I think what she was trying to get me to remember is to look up. That part of what our answer has to be is to find the joy.
Absolutely.
And the beauty.
Yeah.
And it sometimes may be in looking at the mountains, or it may be sometimes looking through a video screen and seeing a friend in a kindred spirit.
Indeed. Yeah.
Because if they take that away from us, or if we let that go, then surely all will be lost.
Yeah. Makes me think of what Bill Plotkin would call the East facet of wholeness. This the wisdom of the cardinal direction of the East, and the innocence and wisdom inherent in the early stages of infancy and early childhood, and also the late elderhood, that is so inherently connected, so close to spirit, so connected to the greater whole, so awake to that bigger picture, and therefore so capable of that levity, like the zoom out and look up and appreciate. Man, that is really important medicine for all of us, especially in these times, and especially in moments of our own individual journeys where we dive deep into the darkness. As valuable and as important as that is to do, and we find the gifts there, we find the gems there in from those dark places that allow us to offer some regenerative contribution to the whole, but we gotta be balanced in it. And something else I want to reflect from what I heard you say too, in terms of what and how we can be right now is well, as you said earlier, reconnecting to what's most meaningful for us. And I think perhaps through that, getting really clear on what is ours to do. What's the role for us to play? That's the part for us to play in the symphony. There's such a deep fulfillment and joy in just that. And I'll be damned if that's not the way that we will find our way through this, when enough of us collectively start doing that in the way that you are offering what you're offering with your written word and your spoken word and your coaching and your leadership. That we help each other remember through our own remembering.
That's right. That's right.
And we can't underestimate the power of that.
That's right. Hannah Arendt, in The Origins of Totalitarianism, talked about sort of the tearing apart of critical thinking as a core component of a fascist education. And if we do not remember, we cannot use critical thinking. We cannot discern what is happening.
Right.
It's a pillar. And so we
Yeah.
have to remember, those who came before and what they did. And we have to remember what it takes to stand up for the earth and for each other.
Yeah. Beautiful. And my great hope is that these dark times can be that wake up call, like the one you got when the earth sucked you down into the crevasse.
Yeah.
And like has happened many times before, like you said. I don't know if you I'm sure you probably have read the Fourth Turning. Are you familiar with that book? That was an eye-opening read for me to understand, to put into context, especially what's happening in our country, the United States right now.
Right.
That there is a cyclical nature to the way generational patterns unfold, and almost a seasonal pattern of every so often, about the span of one human lifetime, there's a period of crisis where the old institutional ways have been broken for long enough cynicism and division has resulted that shit gets really real. Yeah, well, I hope and that being really, really the kind of place, exactly the kind of place where we are right now. And I hope and I pray that we will find a way through it without needing to resort to all out violence like we have before. World War II, Civil War, etc. And sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, it might happen again. We might need to learn that kind of lesson again. And geez, guess we'll just sort of see what it takes, and have enough of us remembered these deeper truths to be able to somehow turn the Titanic of the ship to miss the iceberg.
It is not our work to complete the work. It is not ours to complete the work, but neither are we at liberty to neglect the work. It's not up to you individually. It's up to us collectively. Jon Stewart, a few months ago, in one of his brilliant rants was, democracy is not something that you fight and win. It's something you defend every day.
Yeah.
We just have to remember, too, to take care of ourselves when we do that.
Crucial. Yeah. I think it's the only way we can do it well. Do it from that loving and integrated place that remembers there is they are not the enemy.
That's right.
They are my people. We're in this together.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, we can only hold that when we take good care of ourselves. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jerry.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the spaciousness to lean into some of these really profound issues. I really welcome the conversation.
It's been so great. Is there any last words you'd like to leave our audience with, or does that feel complete?
John O'Donohue, in his wonderful blessing for those who are exhausted, There's a wonderful line there that comes to mind right now, which is be excessively gentle with yourself. Be excessively gentle with yourself.
Thank you. I'm taking that one in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you, like me, feel passionate about this idea of redefining the way we think about impact to a bit more of a soulful orientation and what that could do for our planet, for our species, for all beings, then please, I'd love to ask for your help. If you could just take a moment to subscribe on whatever platform you receive this podcast and leave, if it feels right to you, a glowing 5-star review. That will do wonders in supporting me in growing this show, attracting more amazing guests, and really bringing this movement, this exploration out into the world. Thank you so much for your time and attention. So glad you joined us here for this conversation today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.